The air in Alara's small apartment was thick with the ghost of yesterday's rain and the heavy presence of a decision made for her. She sat on the edge of her worn velvet armchair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white monuments to a silent, protracted grief. The grief was not for a person, but for a life she had meticulously, painstakingly built from the rubble her mother had left behind. A life that was, in this moment, being dismantled again. She had not cried when her mother Eleanor had called. Eleanor's voice, a confection of honeyed tones and steel trap intentions, had laid out the terms with the casual cruelty of a bored monarch. A debt had been incurred, not a simple, vulgar monetary debt that could be tallied on a ledger, but a complex, social one, a favor of immense scale that had been called in. And Alara, as she had always been, was the collateral, the payment. Now, Eleanor stood by the window, not looking at the dreary cityscape, but at her own reflection in the glass. She was a woman sculpted from vanity and desperation, her posture immaculate, her silver blonde hair a helmet of expensive maintenance. She wore a cream-colored suit that likely cost more than Alara's rent for an entire year. She adjusted the cuff of her blouse, a small, fussy movement that betrayed nothing of the gravity of the transaction she had just completed. "It's a good opportunity, darling," Eleanor said, her voice floating across the room, detached and serene. "Mr. Kwan is a very important man, very powerful. This alliance will solve so many of our problems." Alara's gaze drifted to a framed print on her wall, a detailed botanical illustration of a plant that could thrive in volcanic soil. Resilient, adaptable. She had bought it as a reminder. Now, it felt like a mockery. She thought about the word her mother used, alliance, as if this were a treaty between nations and not the sale of her only child. She thought about the other word, our. There were no our problems. There were only Eleanor's problems, and Alara was, as always, the solution. "He is a gangster, Mother," Alara said. Her voice was not a whisper, but it was quiet. It was a voice that had learned long ago that volume accomplished nothing but attracting unwanted attention. It was precise. Eleanor turned from the window, her perfectly painted lips thinning into a line of irritation. "Don't be so dramatic. He's a businessman, a global entrepreneur. The old families, the ones with real power, they operate differently. You wouldn't understand the nuance." He was not a global entrepreneur. He was Kwan Jae-hwa, the chairman of the Golden Phoenix Syndicate, a man whose name was spoken in hushed, fearful tones in the city's underbelly and in its highest echelons of power. His business was order, control, and the quiet, efficient removal of complications. Alara knew this not from gossip, but from the single time she had seen his photograph in a leaked financial report she'd analyzed for her old firm, before she'd been forced to quit to take on freelance work that allowed her to remain invisible. His face was a mask of cold neutrality, his eyes holding a stillness that was more frightening than any overt threat. "What was the debt?" Alara asked, her question a flat stone skipped across the churning water of her mother's self-interest. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "It's complicated. Investments, introductions. I secured a place for us in a world you can't even imagine. It required a certain stake. He protected me from some very unpleasant people. Now, the bill has come due. He doesn't want money. No, a man like Kwon Jae-hwa would have no use for Eleanor's paltry borrowed money. He dealt in a different currency, loyalty, fear, obligation. And now, it seemed, daughters. "He wanted you," Eleanor continued, her tone shifting, becoming almost accusatory. "He saw a picture. He was intrigued. He values quiet competence, grace under pressure. All those things I apparently lack." The last words were laced with a familiar, bitter sarcasm. It was a line she had used for years, a way to frame Alara's strengths as a judgment against her own flamboyant failures. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a narrative crafted by a desperate woman. The doorbell rang, a sharp, clinical chime that severed the last thread of Alara's old life. Two men stood in the hallway. They were dressed in identical, impeccably tailored black suits. They were not large or overtly muscular. They did not need to be. Their presence was a physical manifestation of power, their stillness a promise of swift, efficient action. They looked past Eleanor, their eyes dark and unreadable, settling on Alara. "It is time," one of them said, his voice a low, respectful murmur that was somehow more chilling than a command. Eleanor smiled, a brilliant, brittle thing. "Your chariot awaits, darling." She leaned in and kissed the air beside Alara's cheek, her expensive perfume a final, suffocating insult. "Make me proud." Alara did not look back as she walked out of the apartment. She did not take a bag. The men had been explicit about that. She was to bring nothing. She was not moving from one home to another. She was being uninstalled. The car was a black sedan, so dark it seemed to drink the light from the street lamps. The interior was silent, the world outside sliding by like a film on mute. Alara watched the familiar streets of her neighborhood give way to the glittering, indifferent towers of the financial district. She thought about screaming. She thought about throwing herself from the moving vehicle. But these were impulses born of a hope she no longer possessed. Screaming would accomplish nothing. An escape attempt would be inefficient. It would be messy. And the men in the car, the entire organization they represented, were the antithesis of messy. They drove for what felt like an eternity, climbing higher and higher into the city's steel and glass canopy, until they arrived at a skyscraper that pierced the clouds. It had no name on its obsidian facade, only a single stylized golden phoenix etched into the glass above the entrance. The private elevator ascended in unnerving silence, its speed a gentle pressure against her body. It opened not into a lobby, but directly into a penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a statement of absolute dominion. The space was vast, a cavern of polished marble, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city below like a conquered territory. The furniture was sparse, architectural, and impossibly expensive. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, a silence that absorbs sound and emotion, leaving only a sterile, cold peace. One of the men gestured towards a single chair, a severe but beautiful piece of black leather and chrome, positioned in the center of the room. It faced the windows. It was a throne overlooking a kingdom. "Mr. Kwan will be with you shortly," he said, and then they were gone, the elevator doors closing with a soft, final hiss. Alara did not sit. To sit would be to accept the role assigned to her, the waiting supplicant, the patient prize. Instead, she walked to the vast expanse of glass and placed her hand against its cool, unyielding surface. Below, the city was a tapestry of light, a million lives burning bright and unknown, a world she was no longer a part of. She felt like an astronaut looking back at a planet she could never return to. The exhaustion of long-term suffering was a physical weight on her shoulders, a constant low-grade fever in her blood. And yet, beneath it, a tiny, cold ember of defiance still glowed. She had survived her mother for 28 years. She would survive this. She did not know how long she stood there, lost in the constellations of traffic and streetlights. Time had become fluid, meaningless. The only constant was the hum of the building's climate control and the frantic, silent beating of her own heart. "You prefer the view from a height." The voice was not loud. It was a low, resonant baritone, as smooth and dark as the polished wood floor. It came from behind her, from a part of the room she had thought empty. She did not startle. Her body had been braced for a confrontation for hours, for years. She turned slowly, with a grace she did not feel. He was sitting in an armchair in the shadows, a glass of amber liquid held loosely in one hand. He had not been there a moment ago. He must have been. She had simply failed to see him. He was a part of the room's stillness, an extension of its quiet, predatory power. It was him, Kwan Jae-hwa, the man from the photograph, but the image had been a pale imitation. It had captured his features, the sharp planes of his face, the dark, intelligent eyes, the severe cut of his black hair, but it had not captured his presence. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested immense, restrained power. He did not rush, he was not performing. He wore a charcoal suit of such perfect tailoring it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. He rose from the chair, not quickly, but with a deliberate, unhurried grace. He was taller than she had expected. He walked towards her, stopping a respectful distance away. He did not look at her body, at the simple, inexpensive dress she wore. His eyes met hers, and they were not cold as she had expected. They were analytical. They were the eyes of a man who missed nothing, who processed information at a speed she could only guess at. "My apologies for the method of your arrival," he said. His English was perfect, tinged with the faintest trace of a British accent, the product of an expensive education. "It is not my preferred way of conducting business. It is, however, efficient." Ilara remained silent. She had no words for this. Apology and efficiency were not concepts she associated with being sold by her mother. He gestured to a low table where a single slim file folder lay. It was the color of bone. "Your mother, Eleanor Vance, is a woman of considerable ambition and limited resources. She came to me for protection from creditors of a more volatile disposition. I provided it. In return, she offered a unique form of collateral." He picked up the file. He did not open it. He held it as if it were something distasteful. "She presented you as an asset, a key to a world she wishes to inhabit. She spoke of your grace, your intelligence, your background in landscape architecture, your eye for beauty. She painted a picture of a perfect hostess, a silent partner who could elevate my social standing." He paused, his eyes scanning her face, cataloging the exhaustion, the faint tremor in her hand. The presentation was compelling. The product, however, appears to be here under duress. A sharp, hysterical laugh almost escaped her. The product. She was a product, a commodity. She swallowed it down, the sound dying in her throat. "Is this what you want, Ilara Vance?" he asked, his voice steady, devoid of judgment. It was a simple question. A terrifying question. It was the first time anyone had asked her what she wanted in what felt like a lifetime. Her own voice, when it came, was raspy. "Does it matter?" "To me, it is the only thing that matters," he said. The statement was so direct, so at odds with everything she knew about men and power and transactions, that it stunned her into silence. "I do not build my house on a foundation of lies. I do not traffic in unwilling participants. It is bad for business. It creates instability, complications." He looked down at the file in his hands. It contained, she presumed, the contract, the bill of sale for her life. Her mother had probably signed it with a flourish. "Your mother believes this document gives her power," he said softly. "She believes it binds you to me, and me to her. She does not understand the nature of my business. A contract is only as strong as the integrity of the people who sign it. Her integrity is non-existent." And then he did something she never would have anticipated. With a calm, deliberate motion, he tore the file in half. The sound was a sharp, satisfying rip in the oppressive silence of the room. He did not stop there. He tore the two halves into quarters, and the quarters into eighths, the pieces of paper fluttering from his fingers like dead leaves. He dropped the confetti of her former bondage onto the dark wood floor. "The debt your mother accrued is her own," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "It will be dealt with, but it has nothing to do with you. You are free to go." Ilara stared at the shredded paper on the floor. It was the wreckage of her mother's grand plan, the end of the negotiation. It was liberation, handed to her by the one man she was supposed to fear the most. The shock of it was a physical blow, leaving her dizzy, breathless. The quiet exhaustion she had been carrying for so long suddenly crashed over her, and her knees felt weak. "However," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, becoming even quieter, I would advise against it, at least for tonight. He looked towards the windows at the city still glittering below. Your mother is a chaotic force. When she discovers this arrangement has been terminated, she will be unpredictable. The men I protected her from are patient, but not forgiving. Without my protection, she will be desperate. And when your mother is desperate, she is dangerous, particularly to you. He turned his gaze back to her. The analytical quality was gone, replaced by something else. Something closer to concern, though that seemed impossible. This building is the most secure location in this city. You are safe here. A room has been prepared for you. You may stay as long as you need to. You may leave tomorrow morning, and a car will take you wherever you wish to go. No one will stop you. The choice is yours. He had given her back her life, and in the same breath, he had shown her how fragile it was. Leaving meant walking back into the storm of her mother's making, a storm that now had a new, more dangerous energy. Staying meant accepting the protection of a man whose world was built on violence and fear, even if he directed none of it at her. She looked at his face, at the unyielding calm in his eyes. He was not asking her for anything. He was stating facts. He was laying out options. For the first time, she was being treated not as a pawn or a prize, but as a person with agency. A disorienting relief washed over her, so potent it felt like a drug. Why? She finally managed to ask, the word barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Quan Jihua regarded her for a long moment. He seemed to be weighing his words, choosing them with the same precision he applied to everything else. My organization, my life, is built on a single principle: order. I identify chaos, and I contain it, control it, or eliminate it. Your mother is chaos in a Chanel suit, he said, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the ghost of a smile. You are not. I have a vested interest in seeing order prevail, he paused. Also, my grandmother was a landscape architect. She believed that a person who could bring life and structure to a barren patch of earth was a person of immense value. I have always found her judgment to be sound. He gestured down a long white hallway. The second door on the left. There is food in the kitchen if you are hungry. Rest. We can speak more in the morning if you are still here. With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the marble floor, disappearing into the shadows from whence he came. Alara was left alone again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of a cage. It was the silence of a sanctuary. She looked from the shredded contract on the floor to the dark, beckoning hallway. For the first time in a very long time, she had a choice. And in the quiet clarity of that penthouse, high above the sleeping city, she chose to stay. Sleep did not come easily. It was a skittish creature, frightened away by the sheer novelty of her surroundings. The bed was a cloud of high-thread count linens and down pillows, a universe away from her own lumpy mattress. The room was a study in minimalist luxury, all clean lines and muted colors, with one wall made entirely of glass, offering a panoramic view of the dawn as it began to break over the city. Alara watched the sky bleed from inky black to a bruised purple, then to a soft, promising gray. She thought about his words. The choice is yours. It was a simple phrase, but for her, it was revolutionary. Her life had been a series of reactions to her mother's actions, a constant state of bracing for the next impact. The idea of making a choice based purely on her own needs felt foreign, selfish, and deeply, intoxicatingly liberating. When the sun finally crested the horizon, painting the room in strokes of pale gold, she rose. The clothes she had worn were gone. In their place, laid out on a valet chair, were simple, elegant garments: a pair of soft gray trousers, a cream-colored silk blouse, and leather slippers. There was a note written in a precise, angular script. I took the liberty. My housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, has a discerning eye. She dressed, the fine fabrics a strange caress against her skin. She felt like an actress in a play she hadn't auditioned for. She left the room and padded down the silent hallway, her bare feet making no sound on the heated marble floors. The penthouse was quiet, filled with the soft, indirect light of morning. She found the kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and black granite that looked as if it had never been used. A single cup of coffee, black and steaming, sat on the counter next to a plate with a single perfect croissant. Another note: I am not a monster. Coffee first. A dry, unexpected laugh escaped her. It was a small sound, but in the vast silence it felt momentous. The man was a paradox, a ruthless crime lord with the understated wit of a literature professor. She took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect. Of course it was. She spent the morning exploring the penthouse. It was less a home and more a museum dedicated to its owner. There were no family photographs, no personal trinkets, no clutter. There was only art, books, and order. The books were revealing: philosophy, ancient military strategy, economic theory, and, surprisingly, a large collection of texts on botany and horticulture. Her exploration eventually led her to a spiral staircase she hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a corner. It led upwards to a glass door. She hesitated, then pushed it open, and gasped. She was on the roof, but it was not a typical city rooftop of tar and air conditioning units. It was a vast, empty canvas, a forgotten space, 100 stories in the air, with nothing but a few dead planters and a layer of city grime. But the potential was breathtaking. The view was 360 degrees, a God's eye perspective of the entire metropolis. The space was enormous, a blank slate begging for life. She could see it instantly. A design bloomed in her mind, fully formed. A garden in the sky. Not a manicured, fussy English garden, but something resilient, modern, and wild. Sections of hardy grasses that would sway in the wind, creating waves of green and gold. Sculptural rock formations. A grove of Japanese maples, their delicate leaves a splash of crimson against the gray concrete of the surrounding buildings. A water feature, not a fountain, but a still, dark reflection pool that would mirror the sky. It would be a place of peace, of structured wildness, a sanctuary, just like the apartment below. She stood there for a long time, lost in the vision, her hands tracing the lines of her imaginary creation in the air. For the first time since she had walked out of her apartment, she felt a flicker of her old self. The creator, the designer, the woman who brought order and beauty to forgotten spaces. When she came back downstairs, he was there. Kwon Jae-hwa was sitting at the massive dining table, a laptop open before him, a phalanx of his silent, suited men standing at a respectful distance. He looked up as she entered, his eyes immediately noting the change in her. The dazed, shocked look was gone, replaced by a spark of purpose. "You found the roof," he stated. It was not a question. "It's a tragedy," she said, her voice stronger now. "All that space, all that light. Wasted." He closed the laptop. He gave her his full attention. This, she was learning, was one of his most powerful tools, the absolute, undivided focus he could bestow upon a person. "You see potential where others see an empty space." "It's what I do," she said. An idea, bold and terrifying, took root in her mind. "I want to fix it." His eyebrows, dark and perfectly shaped, rose a fraction of an inch. "Fix it? I am a landscape architect," she said, her voice gaining confidence with every word. "I design spaces. That rooftop is a design crime. It's an insult to the sky. I want to build a garden there." She took a breath. "I don't want your charity, Mr. Kwon. I don't want to be a guest in your gilded cage. I want to work. Let me design that garden for you. Consider it payment for the coffee." A long silence stretched between them. The suited men did not move, but the air felt charged, expectant. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had overstepped. She had mistaken his civility for friendship, his temporary protection for an open invitation. Then he did something utterly shocking. A genuine smile touched his lips. It was small, a slight upward curve, but it transformed his severe face, lighting his dark eyes with a warmth she would not have thought possible. "Mr. Kwan was my father," he said. "My name is Jae Hwa." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Elara Vance, and tell me about your garden." For the next hour, she talked. She sketched on a napkin, her hands moving with a long-forgotten confidence. She spoke of root systems and wind resistance, of color theory and the emotional impact of space. She was not the victim, not the commodity, not the daughter of a desperate woman. She was an expert in her field, and she was incandescent with passion. Jae Hwa listened. He did not interrupt. He asked a few pointed questions that revealed a surprising depth of knowledge. He saw her, not the asset her mother had tried to sell, but the architect she truly was. When she was finished, her napkin covered in a frantic, beautiful mess of lines and notes, he nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "You will have a budget. My assistant, Mr. Choi, will arrange for whatever materials and staff you require. The space is yours." It was that simple. A decision made. An army mobilized. "There is one condition," he added, his expression turning serious again. "What is it?" she asked, her guard returning. "You will not refer to it as a gilded cage again," he said, his voice low. "This is not a prison. It is a fortress. And at present, you are its most valued resident. You will treat it and yourself with the respect that position entails?" The days that followed settled into a strange, new rhythm. Elara threw herself into the rooftop project with a ferocity that surprised even herself. It was a way to channel the fear, the uncertainty, the simmering anger at her mother, and transform it into something beautiful. Mr. Choi, a perpetually calm and unnervingly efficient man, became her right hand. He procured rare plants from across the globe, arranged for cranes to lift tons of soil and stone 100 stories into the air, and assembled a team of workers who followed Alara's plans with unquestioning precision. Jae Hwa was an absent presence. He would be gone for days at a time, conducting his business in the silent, invisible way he did everything. But there were signs of him everywhere. A rare book on Japanese garden design left on her nightstand. A specific type of tea she had mentioned enjoying appearing in the kitchen. He was observing her, learning her, from a distance. Sometimes he would appear on the rooftop late at night, after the workers had gone home. He would stand in the darkness, a silent silhouette against the city lights, and simply watch her as she surveyed her burgeoning creation. They rarely spoke much during these visits. The silence between them was a language of its own, a shared appreciation for the slow, steady process of building something real. One evening, she found him by the new reflection pool. The water was still and black, mirroring the stars that managed to pierce the city's glow. "It's almost finished," she said, her voice soft. "It is more than I imagined," he replied, his gaze on the water. "You have created peace where there was nothing." "I had good materials," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "The artist is always more important than the materials," he countered. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light, she could see a weariness in his eyes that his immaculate posture usually concealed. "I received a report today. From my sources." Her blood ran cold. "My mother." He nodded. "She has been active. She attempted to leverage her supposed connection to me to secure new lines of credit. It did not go well for her. The people she originally owed money to are growing impatient now that my protection has been withdrawn. She is selling her belongings. The house is in foreclosure." Elara felt a pang of something she couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It was the old, familiar ache of being tethered to a sinking ship. "What will she do?" "What she always does," Jae Hwa said, his voice flat. "She will escalate. She believes you are here, living in luxury. She sees it as a betrayal. She has been making calls, trying to find a journalist, anyone who will listen to her story about her stolen daughter." The sharp terror of immediate threat, an emotion she hadn't felt since that first night, returned. Public humiliation. That was her mother's favorite weapon. She cannot reach you here, Jaehua said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. He saw the fear in her eyes. I have taken precautions. All of her communications are monitored. My legal team is prepared. She is a moth flying towards a flame she cannot comprehend. He paused, and his next words were heavy with significance. There is a charity gala in 2 weeks, the Obsidian Gala. It is the most important social event of the year in this city. I must attend. I want you to come with me. As your hostess? She asked, a hint of her old defensiveness creeping in. No, he said, his gaze unwavering, as the architect of the most impressive private garden in this city, as my partner. The word hung in the air between them, freighted with a meaning that went far beyond business. It is time for you to be seen, not as your mother's daughter, but as yourself. It is also the perfect place for a moth to finally meet the flame. Eleanor Vance was a woman running out of options. The world she had built on a foundation of lies and borrowed glamour was crumbling around her. The calls from creditors were no longer polite. The friends who had once flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Her name, once a key that opened doors, was now a liability, and it was all Elara's fault. In Eleanor's mind, the narrative was simple. She had presented her daughter with the opportunity of a lifetime, a golden ticket into the highest echelons of society, and Elara had squandered it. She had somehow turned the formidable Quan Jaehua against her, against them. But worse, she was clearly still there, living in that palace in the sky, enjoying the fruits of a deal her mother had brokered. The injustice of it was a physical sickness in her stomach. She had not heard from Jaehua, not a word. Her calls went unanswered. Her frantic, threatening, and then begging emails were met with a digital wall of silence. He had torn up the contract, but he had kept the girl. It was theft. It was a breach of contract. She would sue him. But she had no money for a lawyer who would dare to take on a man like Quan. Desperation was a corrosive acid. It ate away at her judgment, her carefully constructed facade. She had one last card to play. The court of public opinion. She would crash the Obsidian Gala. It was the one place she knew Jaehua would be, a place crawling with press in the city's elite. She would confront them. She would create a scene so public, so humiliating, that he would have no choice but to deal with her, to give her what she was owed. She pictured the scene in her mind, the flashing cameras, the shocked faces, her own tragic, noble performance as the wronged mother. It would be her masterpiece. It was a fatal miscalculation, born of an arrogance so profound it had become a form of blindness. She had no idea that she was not the playwright of this final act, but merely a pawn walking into a perfectly laid trap. The night of the Obsidian Gala arrived on a wave of flashing camera bulbs and the murmur of 1,000 hushed conversations. The venue was a historic ballroom, its vaulted ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers, its walls lined with flowers that cost more than most people's cars. It was a room suffocating in its own opulence. Elara stood beside Jaehua, a calm island in a sea of performative power. She wore an emerald green gown, the color of new leaves after a spring rain. It was a dress that was both elegant and severe, its lines architecturally precise. For the first time, she did not feel like an imposter. She felt correctly placed. The weeks of hard physical work on the garden had given her a new strength, a new sense of self. The quiet, steady respect from Jaehua had been a balm on wounds she hadn't even known were still open. He had not held her hand or whispered sweet nothings. Theirs was not a relationship built on passion, but on something far more rare and durable, mutual recognition. He saw her competence, her resilience, her quiet strength. She saw his stability, his unyielding sense of order, his surprising hidden capacity for a certain kind of protective gentleness. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur against her ear, the scent of his clean, crisp cologne a familiar comfort. The CEO of the firm that designed this building is over by the pillar. He heard about your rooftop project. He wants an introduction. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact. Her work was speaking for itself. A real smile, one that reached her eyes, bloomed on her face. It was in that moment, that precise moment of quiet triumph, that the chaos arrived. A commotion near the entrance. A woman's voice, sharp and shrill, cutting through the polite hum of the party. "Let go of me! I am Eleanor Vance. I have a right to be here. My daughter is in there." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. And there she was, Eleanor. She was a caricature of her former self. Her hair was slightly askew, her makeup a little too bright, a little too desperate. She wore a dress that had been fashionable 5 years ago, a relic from a more prosperous time. She looked like a ghost haunting the scene of her former glory. Her eyes, wild and frantic, scanned the room and locked onto Ilara. A triumphant, venomous smile spread across her face. This was it, her stage, her audience. She strode towards them, security guards trailing in her wake, unsure how to handle a woman of her former standing. "There you are!" she cried, her voice echoing in the sudden, shocked silence of the ballroom. All conversation stopped, the music faltered. Every eye in the room was on them. "Ilara, darling, I have been so worried. This man, he has been holding you captive." Eleanor pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Jae-hwa, who watched her approach with the calm, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a particularly volatile chemical reaction. "You have an obligation!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice cracking. Her gaze darted between Ilara and Jae-hwa. "We had a deal. You owe me. You owe me for her." Ilara felt a cold dread wash over her, but also a strange final clarity. The last vestiges of filial duty, of guilt, of shared history, evaporated in the heat of her mother's public self-immolation. She looked at this woman, this stranger, and felt nothing but a vast, empty sadness. She did not speak. She did not need to. Jae-hwa placed a steadying hand on the small of her back, a simple, proprietary gesture that spoke volumes. He took one step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Ilara, a shield of quiet, absolute authority. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the silent room, each syllable perfectly articulated, each word a drop of ice. "You seem to be operating under a series of misapprehensions. Let us clear them up." He did not raise his voice. He did not issue a command. He simply waited. The security guards froze. The whispers died. The entire glittering, powerful population of the room held its collective breath. "First," Jae-hwa began, his tone that of a lecturer addressing a particularly slow student, "Ilara is not my captive. She is my guest and, more recently, my valued colleague. Her work on the Sky Garden at my corporate headquarters is, I am told, revolutionary." He glanced towards the CEO by the pillar, who gave a sharp, affirmative nod. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Her work, her project. He was vindicating her publicly. "Second," he continued, his gaze pinning Eleanor to the spot, "you and I have no deal. I do not make deals with people who attempt to sell their own children. It is a distasteful business practice. I terminated our proposed arrangement the moment I met your daughter and realized the profound discrepancy between your description and the reality of her character." Eleanor's face, which had been flushed with righteous fury, began to pale. This was not how her script was supposed to go. He was twisting it, turning her tragedy into a tawdry, pathetic footnote. "And third," Jae-hwa said, and now his voice dropped even lower, becoming a silken, deadly thing. "You speak of obligation, of what you are owed." He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out not a weapon, but his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, his movements economical and precise. "You are correct. There is a debt," he said, "but you have misunderstood who owes it, and to whom." He turned the screen of the phone towards her. It displayed a series of financial documents, legal notices, and acquisition reports. "Over the past few weeks, my family office has been diversifying its portfolio. We found a number of distressed assets on the market. A mortgage from a second-tier bank, several high-interest personal loans from less than reputable lenders, a significant marker at a casino in another city. He swiped through the screens, each one a nail in Eleanor's coffin. It seems, Eleanor, that in your desperation, you have leveraged everything you have. The house you live in, the car you drive, the very clothes on your back. As of 3 hours ago, I own it all. I own your debt. I own your life. The corporate metaphor was brutal, a hostile takeover. The blood drained completely from Eleanor's face, leaving it a waxy, slack-jawed mask of horror. The performative confidence, the arrogant fury, it all evaporated, leaving only the raw, terrified core of the woman underneath. You can't, she stammered, the words barely a whisper. I can, Jae-hwa said simply. He put the phone away. And I have. You came here tonight to demand what you are owed. Very well. You are owed nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing. It was the final blow, the carefully constructed edifice of Eleanor Vance's life, built on lies and illusion, collapsed in on itself in a single catastrophic moment. A terrible, guttural sound escaped her throat, a sound of pure animal despair. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the floor of the grand ballroom, the sound of her sobs echoing in the cavernous, silent space. She was a ruin in the midst of splendor. Jae-hwa looked down at her for a moment, his face impassive. Then he turned to the nearest security guard. See that this matter is removed, he said quietly. The guards moved in, their movements efficient and without wasted motion. They helped the weeping, broken woman to her feet and escorted her from the room, her cries fading into the distance. The show was over. Jae-hwa turned back to Alara. The entire room was still staring, but he only had eyes for her. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. Are you all right? She looked from the door her mother had just been dragged through to the face of the man who had orchestrated her downfall with the dispassionate precision of a chess grandmaster. She should have been horrified. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt a profound, astonishing sense of peace. The weight she had been carrying her entire life, the weight of her mother's chaos, was finally, irrevocably gone. A slow exhale, a breath she felt she had been holding for 28 years, escaped her lips. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. I am, he nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his dark eyes. Then he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so unexpectedly tender, so public, it sent another shockwave through the room. He then turned to the assembled crowd, his voice regaining its command. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the interruption. Allow me to introduce my partner, Alara Vance. She has been the most capable person in every room she has ever been in. It is time. The world knew it. The walk back to the elevator and then the silent ride up to the penthouse was a blur. The shocked faces of the city's elite, the frantic whispers, the dawning respect in the eyes of the CEO who had wanted an introduction, it all faded into background noise. The only thing that felt real was the steady, warm pressure of Jae-hwa's hand in hers. They stepped out into the quiet sanctuary of the penthouse. The city lights glittered below, no longer a symbol of a world she was excluded from, but a kingdom she was now looking down upon from a position of safety and strength. Without a word, he led her to the spiral staircase. They ascended to the rooftop garden. It was magnificent. Under the moonlight, it was a secret world, a symphony of texture and shadow. The grasses swayed in the gentle breeze, their rustling a soft, shushing sound. The Japanese maples were dark silhouettes against the glowing sky. The reflection pool was a sheet of obsidian capturing the moon and a single bright star. Her vision made real. They stood together in the center of her creation, the city's noise a distant, irrelevant hum. The air was cool and clean, smelling of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. It was the smell of peace. She will have nothing, Ilara said quietly, not a question, but a statement of fact she needed to hear confirmed. She will be provided for, Jaehua replied, his voice calm and measured. A small, clean apartment. A modest stipend. Enough to live, but not enough to cause trouble. She will be monitored. She will never be able to harm you or anyone else again. It was not mercy. It was control. The final containment of a chaotic element. Ilara nodded, accepting it. It was a more generous fate than her mother had ever offered her. She looked around at the garden, at the tangible proof of her own worth, of her own ability to create beauty and order from a barren space. She had done this. With his resources, yes, but with her vision, her hands, her heart. You called me your partner, she said, turning to face him. It is what you are, he said, his gaze intense. In business, and if you will have it, in life. This was it, the final negotiation. But it did not feel like a transaction. It felt like a proposal between two sovereign powers who had found common ground. A marriage is a contract, he said, as if reading her thoughts. It is the oldest, most binding form of alliance. It offers protection, stability, and a clear statement of intent to the rest of the world. He took a step closer, his presence filling her senses. I have spent my life building walls, creating order, eliminating threats. But this, he gestured around at the garden, at the space between them, this peace you have created, I find I am in need of it. My fortress was missing a heart. You have given it one. He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. I am not a man who deals in romance, Ilara. I do not offer declarations of undying passion. I offer loyalty. I offer safety. I offer a partnership of equals, a family built not on obligation or deceit, but on honesty, complication, and the daily choice to stay. He looked into her eyes, and she saw it all there. The lonely boy who inherited an empire, the man who craved order because he knew the depths of chaos, the quiet sovereign who had recognized a kindred spirit in a woman who had been underestimated her entire life. She thought of her old life, the constant fear, the quiet exhaustion. She thought of her mother's love, a currency always spent on herself. And she thought of this man who had torn up a contract to set her free, only to offer her a new one, a better one, written in the ink of respect and choice. She did not need a whirlwind romance. She had had enough drama for a lifetime. What she needed, what she had always craved, was a foundation, a place to stand, a partner who saw her, truly saw her, and valued what he saw. A genuine smile touched her lips, the first truly happy smile of her life. It reached her eyes, and for the first time, they shone with a light that was all her own. I don't leave because things become complicated, Jaehua, she said, her voice steady and clear. I stay. She took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. It felt right. It felt like coming home. Together, they turned and looked out over the city, not as a king and his consort, but as two builders, two architects, standing in the garden they had made, ready to face the future they would now design together. The silence between them was no longer empty, but full of unspoken promises, shared strength, and the quiet, steady peace of a new beginning.